severely injured or disabled members of the armed forces and severely injured or disabled veterans, and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
And it is the last vote in this series, the bill that would make it easier for veterans to get through security lines and at airports. The 5-minute vote earlier today by voice vote, they approved a bill dealing with the cost of living agreement, cost of living rises for veterans, and also dealing with fishing rights on the Cumberland River in Tennessee and Kentucky. Here's a look at what's ahead this week in the U.S. House. We spoke to a Capitol Hill reporter for some details.
Alexander Bolton is senior staff writer for The Hill. The Senate plans to devote their work week to the Farm Bill. What are some of the key issues that we should expect to see come to the floor?
Well, one of the key issues is reducing money for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, the SNAP program. It's the largest assistance program targeted at low-income families, and that's where the savings from this bill are coming from, and it's what enables it to get the Republican support it needs to pass the Senate. So the chamber will be focused on that issue. Another thing it does is it reduces subsidies. Subsidies for farmers making under $750,000 a year would be limited. And another issue is phasing out subsidies for corn and cotton.
A broad question now. What is the Farm Bill? And didn't we see lawmakers working on a Farm Bill last year?
We did. And the Senate passed the Farm Bill, but the House did not take action on the Farm Bill. The difference this year is House Republicans say they're going to be moving on it in June, so there at least seems to be more buy-in from House Republicans than we saw last year. What it is an authorization bill that sets new subsidy formulas for crops. And so it rejiggers the formulas so that different crops get different preferences, different aid going forward.
What is Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid's timetable for finishing the Farm Bill?
Well, Leader Reid would love to have this done by the end of the week so that after the Memorial Day recess, Congress can, or the Senate can then move to the immigration bill. But my colleague Eric Wasson, who covers the Farm Bill for us, tells me that lobbyists tracking the bill say that it will be virtually impossible to get this done by the end of the week.
Now, the House has a couple of substantive bills coming up later this week. One deals with the Keystone Pipeline. What's in that bill?
Well, this would give a permit to TransCanada Corp to build the northern leg of the Keystone Pipeline across the Canada-U.S. border. Right now, the builder of the pipeline needs to get a permission from President Obama. Republicans accuse the president of having dragged his feet on the issue. This would expedite the matter. It would supply that permit, and it's expected to pass with overwhelming Republican support and draw as many as 20 Democrats.
Now, the other substantive measure that the House would be dealing with this week is student loan interest rates. What is proposed in that measure?
Well, this is a pressing issue because on July 1st, the interest rate for Stafford loans will jump from 3.4% to 6.8%. This was a big fight in the last Congress in 2012. Republicans finally backed down after a pitched battle with Democrats on the issue. What House Republicans are proposing and the legislation they'll be bringing to the floor from the Education Committee would peg the rates, the interest rates for Stafford loans to Treasury bills, to the federal interest rate. And so the subsidy would be the Treasury, the interest rate plus a couple percentage points. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that in 2014 this would put the interest rate at around 5%, and that in 2023 the interest rate could go as high as 7.7%. And that's why this has become a very, very partisan bill. It did not win any Democratic votes out of the Education Committee. Democrats warn that the interest rate, while low now, could surge in the years ahead, and that would hurt students. What Democrats want to do is freeze the interest rate at 3.4% and give Congress more time to work out a long-term solution.
Alexander Bolton is the senior staff writer for The Hill. Thanks for talking with us today.
Thanks for having me.
On this vote, the yeas are 413, the nays are 0, 2/3 being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on H.R. 1412 as amended.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. All right, I treated like...
House will be in order. The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purposes does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, big snoopy government agencies can read emails that are over 180 days old without a person's knowledge or consent. That is just wrong. It takes a warrant to eavesdrop phone conversations, but no warrant required to peruse a person's email. If peeping tomcrats can't listen to phones without a warrant, they shouldn't be able to read emails. That's why Congresswoman Lofgren, Congresswoman DeBini, and I introduced the Online Communication Protection Act. It would require a search warrant to seize a person's email. When a person mails a letter, the government cannot open the mail from the time it is placed in the mailbox, travels throughout the fruited plain, and ends up in another mailbox. The law protects the privacy of this snail mail. When a person sends an email through cyberspace, the government should not be allowed to seize the content without a search warrant. At a time when we see more and more government invasion of privacy, Congress should ensure that government does not press the delete button and eliminate the Constitution. And that's just the way it is.
For what purposes does the gentlewoman from New Hampshire seek recognition?
I extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Innovative small businesses all across New Hampshire are using the Internet to reach new markets, create good jobs, and grow our economy. Congress should be working to create an environment that helps these companies expand and hire, not adding new bureaucratic barriers and red tape that will impede growth. But that's exactly what the so-called Marketplace Fairness Act would do. This legislation would force online retailers to collect sales taxes on behalf of over 9,000 taxing jurisdictions nationwide, creating a web of bureaucracy that would stifle small businesses. Later this week, I will return home to New Hampshire to hear how this tax would impact Granite State entrepreneurs. I urge my colleagues to do the same in their states and to stand up for small businesses by opposing this misguided legislation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
President, I consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to honor two brave federal law enforcement officers who lost their lives during a training accident last Friday. Christopher Lorick and Stephen Shaw were both members of the FBI's hostage rescue team. This elite unit has taken part in more than 800 hostage situations over the last 2 decades. Members of the hostage rescue team dedicate their lives to training for critical terrorist and hostage and criminal situations. Most recently, the team successfully rescued a 5-year-old boy who was being held hostage by a 65-year-old man in Alabama. Both Christopher Lorick and Stephen Shaw spent many years serving their nation by putting themselves at risk for others who were in danger. Tragically, they died during a maritime counterterrorism exercise their team was performing off the coast of Virginia Beach. Both these men leave behind young families, and our thoughts and prayers are with their loved ones during this difficult time. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize and celebrate the centennial of the City of Carrollton, Texas. The City of Carrollton was incorporated 100 years ago on June 14, 1913. Carrollton has truly blossomed into a prosperous and exemplary city. From a population of 1,600 in 1950, it has grown now to over 130 residents and is home to thousands of successful businesses. I am proud to say that my family has been able to be part of this great history. It was my privilege to serve as mayor of Carrollton from 1984 to 1986. My brother Ronnie served for years as a city council member, and currently my son Matthew has the honor of being the city's mayor. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the 24th Congressional District of Texas, I ask all my distinguished colleagues to join me in recognizing the 100th anniversary of the incorporation of the City of Carrollton, Texas. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Kansas seek recognition?
Seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, Memorial Day is a day our grateful nation devotes to observing the extraordinary sacrifices paid by so many brave military men and women. Those who served so honorably died to protect the values and ideals upon which our country was built, and we will never forget them. Mr. Speaker, while we continue to work on behalf of the American people here in Washington, let us remember we work for people outside the Beltway, many who are still searching for employment. With the unemployment rate for post-9/11 veterans at 9.2%, I'm heartbroken when reminded of veterans who come back from deployments abroad and cannot find work back home. This Memorial Day weekend, let us remember to always honor those so devoted to their country that they gave their lives. And let us honor those veterans who defend us on the front lines abroad by putting these brave men and women here first in line at home to find a job, provide for their families, and to realize the American dream. I yield back.
The Chair lays before the House the following personal requests.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. Clyburn of South Carolina for today and Mr. Diaz-Balart of Florida for Monday, May 20th through Wednesday, May 22nd.
Without objection, the requests are granted. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, 13 years ago, on May 8th of the year 2000, 19 Marines lost their lives in a tragic plane crash at Marana Regional Airport. This was in Arizona. The Marine Corps attributed partial blame for the crash to error on the part of the pilot, Lieutenant Colonel John Brow, and the co-pilot, Major Brooks Gruber. The Corps' decision to assign blame to the pilots has been a point of controversy ever since the year 2000. Mr. Speaker, 2 years after the accident, I received a letter from Major Gruber's wife, Connie, who actually lives in the district that I represent, the home of Camp Lejeune Marine Base and New River Air Station. I will quote from her letter to me that I received in 2000. I contact you in hopes that leaders of integrity, free of bias, would have both the intelligence and the courage it takes to decide the facts for themselves. If you do that, you will agree that human factors/pilot error findings should not stand as it is in military history. Again, I respectfully ask you for your support. Please do not simply pass this matter along to General Jones without offering the support my husband and his comrades deserve. Please remember these 19 Marines can no longer speak for themselves. I certainly am not afraid to speak for them, and I believe someone else has to. Even though it is easier to put to rest and forgotten, please join me in doing the right thing by taking the time to address this important issue. Mr. Speaker, she further stated, and I quote, with so many wrongs in the world we cannot make right, I ask that you prayerfully consider an injustice that you can help make right. I realize you alone might not be able to amend the report, but you can certainly support my efforts to permanently remove this black mark from my husband's honorable military service record. Military leaders continue to refuse to amend this report, but I am certain that there must be by other means of making the change, given the controversy of this aircraft and the Marine Corps' vested interests. Surely there is an unbiased ethical way to rightfully absorb these pilots. Please help me by not only forwarding my request, but also by supporting it. Mr. Speaker, I hold up now a photograph of the V-22 Osprey. The Osprey is a very unique plane, and at the time of this accident in the year 2000, it was an experimental plane. These two pilots, John Brow and Brooks Gruber, were not experimental pilots. They had no training in flying an experimental plane. This plane itself should never have been asked to do what was done that night. In fact, Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney was trying to eliminate the V-22 program, and I was in Congress at the time, and I remember vividly that it was a major fight here in Congress whether we were going to fund the V-22 program or not fund the program. And again, Secretary of Defense Cheney wanted to scrap the program. The Marine Corps wanted the V-22. They were convinced this was a plane that they need desperately. So they asked the two pilots, one of Nighthawk 71, which was the lead plane that actually landed without too much trouble. It did have a hard landing. But in the second plane behind them was Nighthawk 72, and that was a plane that crashed and killed 19 Marines. Since receiving Connie Gruber's letter, I have done everything in my power over the last 12 years to clear the names of Lieutenant Colonel John Brow and Major Brooks Gruber. What has frustrated me was the Marine Corps will not acknowledge that these pilots could not be and should not be held at fault because they had no training in the V-22. there was an issue known as vortex ring state, and Mr. Speaker, anyone that flies particularly helicopters would understand that term, vortex ring state. But at the time of this accident, Bell Boeing, who produced this V-22, and the Marine Corps had no idea of how they should react, the pilots, to vortex ring state with the V-22. Mr. Speaker, I have brought a little model with the approval of the House to the floor that will show that the plane can go from a helicopter mode to a plane mode where it flies just like a regular plane. But at this point, again, Bell Boeing and also the Marine Corps did not understand vortex ring state and how it could impact this plane. And when this plane is coming down, falling behind Nighthawk 72, what happened was that the vortex ring state really made this plane just flip over, and the plane crashed, and 19 Marines were burned to death. Mr. Speaker, the wives of these two pilots, John Brown and Brooks Gruber, all they're asking, the lawsuits are over. Bell Boeing has been sued for millions and millions of dollars. It has been disclosed, so no one knows the exact figure. But I can tell you, after talking to the attorney for Connie Gruber and Trish Brown, that the lawsuits are over. I've spoken to Brian Alexander, who handled the lawsuits for 17 of the 19 families in New York. He said the lawsuits are over. So basically, all we're asking the Marine Corps to do is to please just issue a letter to Connie and Trish that clearly states that your husband, flying this V-22, was not prepared how to handle vortex ring state, because Bell Boeing and we, the Marine Corps, did not understand it either. So how can we train pilots if we don't understand what we're trying to train them in? So therefore, it's been a very frustrating 10 or 12 years of trying to get the Marine Corps to bring peace to John Brown and Brooks Gruber. Mr. Speaker, Richard Whittle, with whom I've had many conversations, wrote the book called The Dream Machine. It's the history of the V-22 and all the problems it's had along the way and all the fights that we had in Congress and outside of Congress to make this plane a reality for the Marine Corps. But something I want to read from his book, The Dream Machine, where the actual line existed for the Osprey was something the program's developmental test pilots had not determined. We're talking about vortex ring state, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to read that again. Where the actual line existed for the Osprey was something the program's developmental test pilots had not determined through hundreds of test flights to explore that part of the Osprey's envelope had been planned. They had planned, Mr. Speaker, to have hundreds of tests, but it further states that Nolan Smith, the Osprey program manager and a Marine Corps colonel at the time, told me years later that those tests were scrapped in 1998 to save time and money. The Navy Department was going to cut the Osprey's program's budget for the coming year by $100 million. Smith said, after consulting with the Boeing engineers in charge of flight testing, Philip Dunford, Smith said, the program manager decided that they could save about $50 million and a lot of time if they didn't do all the tests planned for the Osprey at high rates of descent. Mr. Speaker, again, these pilots in Nighthawk 72, falling behind Nighthawk 71, were descending, and yet no one knew what the parameters were. The pilots did not know the parameter, the Marine Corps did not know the parameters, and neither did Bell Boeing. So how in the world could these pilots be held responsible? It is absolutely unfair. I can honestly tell you at the time I knew General McCorkle. He was the general that oversaw Marine aviation. His assistant at the time was Brigadier General Amos, who now is the Commandant of the Marine Corps. And they knew at the time that the V-22 was under tremendous pressure by Secretary of Defense Cheney to scrap the program. Sadly, I say this because I know both these gentlemen, they're very fine fellows, but I will say this, that dead men can't talk. And these two pilots had no one to speak for them but their wives. Connie Gruber down in Jacksonville, North Carolina, Trish Brown over in Maryland. and they have children. Trish has 2 young boys, and Connie has a beautiful little girl named Brooke. Mr. Speaker, that's why this has become an obsession with me, quite frankly. I'm not an expert in flying. I know nothing about how to keep a plane in the air, to be honest with you. But, Mr. Speaker, I have had so many people to join me in this effort. And one of those people is an expert named Rex Rivolo. In fact, he was working with the V-22 program when he was in the Department of Defense. And I want to read his comments, Mr. Speaker, for the record. The failure of the manufacturer Bell Boeing and the Navy to characterize the slow speed, high rate of descent handling qualities of the V-22 through flight testing, the failure to describe them for the aircrew, and the failure to provide an adequate warning system in the aircraft were the causes of the mishap, not the aircrew error. Not the aircrew error. Following the mishap and my discovery of these facts, I became very vocal within the V-22 community in an attempt to clear the aircrew of blame. However, it quickly became clear that the community well understood the causes but was committed to placing the blame on the aircrew, as blaming the aircraft as at the time would have jeopardized the M-22 program, which was and remains the highest priority of the U.S. Marine Corps. Mr. Speaker, that in itself is so sad that this expert, an engineering expert in aerodynamics, would make this kind of statement, but I just read it for the record, Mr. Speaker. He knew and he knows that at that time, these 2 men who had no one to defend them had to take the blame to save the program. Mr. Speaker, America's greatness is because we are a country of integrity and honesty. And when the research I've done on this and found out that people that knew these men, that flew with them, their fellow Marines would tell you today that John Brown and Brooks Gruber were not prepared for what happened, and no other one who flew a V-22 at the time understood vortex ring state and how to react to it. Mr. Speaker, now that the program has been saved, there is no reason that the Marine Corps cannot give a letter to Connie Gruber and Trish Brown, clearly stating that at the time, April the 8th of 2000, that we, the Marine Corps, and the Bell Boeing, the manufacturer, we did not understand vortex ring state because no one had done the testing, because they cut the programs, they cut the testing. And Mr. Speaker, truthfully, what is so ironic, shortly after this crash on April the 8th, Bell Boeing paid Tom McDonald, an experimental pilot, who spent over 700 hours flying the V-22 time after time, and getting it into the vortex ring state, and then figuring out how the pilot should react to it. Mr. Speaker, because of that work by Tom McDonald, we now have warning systems in the V-22. The pilots, when they get into vortex ring state, the warning system starts lighting up on the panel. They hear a sound in the headphones that says sink, sink, sink. So they know exactly how to handle vortex ring state. But John Brown and Brooks Gruber did not know how to handle vortex ring state. I continue to call on the Marine Corps to do what is right. The Corps has one of the greatest respects of the American people because of integrity and courage. Well, Mr. Commandant, the right thing to do is to prove integrity and courage by giving the 2 wives a 1 paragraph. Mr. Speaker, further, I've had so many people to help with this effort that the Assistant Secretary of Defense and the Director of Operational Test and Evaluation at the time of the crash in 2000 was Philip Coyle. He has joined in this effort with Rex Rivolo. And I'll read what Philip Coyle said. There is a rush to blame pilots and to cite factors that relate to pilot performance, rather than cite the true root causes of accidents. The design and detail engineering in an aircraft or vehicle often is the root cause of an accident. And a particular make or model of automobile was crashing too often, say Toyota or Chevrolet, people wouldn't blame the drivers. They would say that something is wrong with the automobile. The Marine Corps has always seemed to blame the pilots. Mr. Speaker, this is why this has become a passion for me personally. And I could not be where I am today without so many experts. I mentioned two today, Phil Cole and Rex Rivolo, who have joined me. I want to mention Jim Schaefer. Jim was, Nick Cole's name was Trigger. He was actually in the air at the time of this plane crash. He saw his friends go down and burn. Mr. Speaker, this is not right for these two wives to carry the pain. Now almost 13 years, April the 8th of 2000, and we've already passed April the 8th of 2013. All they're asking the Marine Corps is a simple letter to just stay. At the time, we did not understand. Bill Borton didn't understand, so therefore we couldn't train your husbands. So therefore your husbands could not have known how to react. Now they have all these warning systems that I just mentioned a moment ago. Mr. Speaker, I am not going to let this go. In fact, I have a meeting with the Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel, on the 10th of July. He's already confirmed the date. I have accumulated so much information on this issue that I probably could have a small library that people could come in and research this accident. But I have great respect for Chuck Hagel. I remember him as a senator when I came out against the Iraq War and I was getting beaten up down in my own district down in eastern North Carolina. I did not know Senator Hagel at the time, but he called me up, left word, I returned his call. He said, Congressman, you're right. Iraq was an unnecessary war. I want to meet with you. So I went over and met with him, Mr. Speaker, and he had his staff spend weeks to show me the maps on Iraq and the fact there were never weapons of mass destruction. For that, I'm of the firm belief that I will meet with him for 30 minutes. That's all he can give me. And I think he will understand that this is not about me, Walter Jones. This is about honor. This is about respect. And the two dead pilots deserve this, Mr. Speaker. Just a few more points, Mr. Speaker, before I close. Kurt Weldon, when they were fighting this program, Secretary Cheney was fighting this program in 98, 99, and 2000, especially after this crash. The one man in the Congress, Mr. Speaker, and I was here at the time, and I can attest to this, was Kurt Weldon, congressman from Pennsylvania, who took on the administration, that took on Dick Cheney, and said, we've got to have this program. We've got to have this program for the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps wants the V-22, and this is their present and this is their future plane. So Kurt Weldon now, Mr. Speaker, has joined me, and I want to share from a letter. Kurt Weldon, and these are his words. I have found it outrageous that the Marine Corps has willingly failed to fully clarify the improper characterization that pilot errors may have contributed to the tragic accident of Nighthawk 72. I joined with Colonel Ron Radish, United States Marine Corps, a member of the JAG investigation team, for the April 8, 2000 MV-22 accident in his assessment that it would be morally wrong to place the blame on the pilots of Nighthawk 72. Everyone, save the most senior leadership of the United States Marine Corps, has acknowledged that the Marine Corps has formally acknowledged the facts and summaries of this investigation and publicly and clearly restored the outstanding commitments and reputation of these two brave Marines. There can be no wavering and no innuendo. Facts are facts. Mr. Weldon further stated, you have my unwavering support to appear at any public event or congressional hearing to set the record straight regarding the need for the United States Marine Corps leadership to stop playing games and once and for all correct the public record regarding the Nighthawk 72 incident and fully clear the names of these two American heroes. Mr. Speaker, I want to read that one more time just to close by Kurt Weldon, former United States Congressman who fought and saved the V-22 program for the Marine Corps. He saved the program. You have my unwavering support to appear at any public event, any congressional hearing to set the record straight regarding the need for the United States Marine Corps leadership to stop playing games and once and for all correct the public record regarding the Nighthawk 72 incident and fully clear the names of these two American heroes. Mr. Speaker, there are so many people who have joined me in this effort. I'm going to name a few. The three investigators now retired, but at the time, Colonel Mike Morgan, a helicopter pilot himself, lawyer Phil Stackhouse, and Lieutenant Colonel Ron Radish, who I just made reference to in Kurt Weldon's statement. These three men were sent to Arizona the day after the accident. Mr. Speaker, they were sent there to investigate the wreckage, the burned wreckage that killed 19 Marines. All three of these men, Mr. Speaker, have joined me in strong letters to clear the names of John Brown and Brooks Gruber. I made reference earlier to Colonel Jim Schaefer, V-22 pilot, friends of these two pilots. He also has joined in saying that at the time we did not understand vortex ring state. At the time we did not understand how vortex ring state would impact on the V-22, the Osprey. Mr. Speaker, again, I hold this up because the Osprey is a very unique plane. It goes from a helicopter mode to it goes to like a plane just flying with the propellers in front of it, and then it goes back up. But Jim Schaefer has said that John Brown and Brooks Gruber do not deserve the blame for this accident. I made reference to Dr. Rex Rivolo in my comments earlier, Mr. Speaker. He's a strong proponent of clearing the pilots' names. Brian Alexander, I made reference that he had handled the lawsuits for 17 of the 19 families whose young sons were killed. Jim Furman, who was the attorney for the two pilots, John Brown and Brooks Gruber, their families. Eric Thorson, a former aircraft investigator for the United States Air Force. He's actually joined us in this as well. And I mentioned Phil Coyle because Phil Coyle has said he was on the inside. He saw it. These pilots could not be held at fault because they were not to blame. Danielle Bryan, Executive Director of Project on Government Oversight, she's joined in this effort. And Bob Cox, a reporter for the Fort Worth Star. And Mr. Speaker, I'll close in just a few minutes because I want to thank the staff for staying on to give me this opportunity to talk about this issue. I have made a promise to Connie Gruber in Jacksonville. Her husband, Brooks Gruber, is buried down in the cemetery, Veterans Cemetery in Jacksonville, North Carolina. I have met Trish Brown and her two boys, Mark and Matthew. I've taken them to lunch here in the members' dining room. Both those ladies have my promise, Mr. Speaker, that if we ever get this one paragraph, that I would like to go to the cemetery at Arlington and stand there with Trish and Matthew and Mark and say, Colonel, rest in peace. You will never be blamed again for this accident because you were not at fault. Then I want to go to the cemetery in Jacksonville, North Carolina with Connie and a little girl, Brooke. Brooke was a baby when her daddy was killed. She's a beautiful little girl of 12 now, I guess soon to be 13. And she never knew her daddy. She's just seen pictures of him holding her as a little baby and smiling at her. That just made it very, very special. These two men deserve, in the eyes of God, to be cleared. I am not the smartest man in Congress, and I do not profess to be one. But God gave me a big heart, and He put this on me almost 13 years ago. And what I have found out, Mr. Speaker, is we are right. We are right. The Marine Corps is wrong in this situation. The experts who helped develop the V-22 have said we are right and the Marine Corps is wrong. Kurt Weldon, who fought so valiantly to save the program, deserves the credit. He's joined and said these two men deserve to be cleared. Mr. Speaker, I remember vividly a quote from Voltaire. To the living we owe respect. To the dead we owe the truth. That's all this is all about is the truth that these two Marines were not trained, did not understand, nor did Bill Bowen, nor did the Marine Corps. They were not trained as to how to handle the vortex ring state. We have gotten a little bit further in the last year, but recently the Marine Corps rejected a letter that the wives had signed off on if they could change two words, and the two words are the same word, the word solely. The word solely. The pilots are not solely at fault. Well, Mr. Speaker, that bothers me because I know, the Marine Corps knows, that they were not trained. Now, if they had been trained as to how to react and respond to vortex ring state in the V-22, then I could accept that word solely. But how in the world can you say that pilots who were not trained because Bill Bowen did not know how to handle vortex ring state in the V-22, the Marine Corps did not understand it, so if they didn't understand it and they didn't train the pilots, how could they be solely responsible? That is absolutely unacceptable to the wives, and it's unacceptable to me. So therefore, again, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to meet with Secretary Hagel on the 10th of July. I will be prepared. I only have 30 minutes, but that's fine. I know he's a busy man with all the problems facing our military in the world. But if he'll give me 30 minutes, Mr. Speaker, I will show him in 20 minutes why these pilots should not be held responsible for this accident. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you and the staff for giving me this extra time. This is one of these things that it's a religion with me. I cannot imagine, because I don't fly much. I've been in a few small planes, and I cannot imagine the panic of these two fellows, knowing that they've got 17 young Marines, privates and corporals sitting in the back of this plane. And how they must have felt, I don't know. God knows their heart, because He was with them when they went down. But all I can think is the panic of something you had not been trained to handle, the panic of what do we do now? Brooks, John, what do we do now? We've got seconds. Seconds. And then the plane flips and burns. I ask God to touch the hearts of the United States Marine Corps and the Commandant. The Commandant now is a fine gentleman. I know him. I have respect for him. But he was there the day and the night of this crash. And the whole reason for this mission was to show the anti-V-22s and Secretary Dick Cheney that this was a remarkable plane, this V-22 Osprey, because they could show how they could descend so quickly and recover some Americans that would be held by terrorists. That was the mission they were on in Marana, Arizona, to show the world that this plane was very unique and it could land and descend quickly and hit the ground and get these people out. Well, the problem was no one understood the parameters of this plane and how it should descend, so therefore these 19 Marines were killed. Mr. Speaker, I hope to be back on the floor right after the memorial break before I meet with the Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel, and talk about this again. I believe sincerely that we are all stronger people and better people when we admit we've made a mistake. And when an organization that the American people love so much, like the Marine Corps, and I love the Marine Corps, Mr. Speaker, but quite frankly, when they will not give Connie and Trish a little paragraph, like I have already said 3 times today, that clearly states that husband was not at fault. It's very disappointing, to say the least. Mr. Speaker, in closing, as I do on the floor when I think about all of our men and women overseas in Afghanistan and Iraq, that I'm going to ask God to please bless our men and women in uniform, to please bless the families of our men and women in uniform. I ask God in His loving arms to hold the families who've given a child dying for freedom in Afghanistan and Iraq. And Mr. Speaker, I'm going to ask at this time that God will touch the hearts of the United States Marine Corps to give peace to the families of John Brown and Brooks Gruber. And Mr. Speaker, I will ask God to please bless the House and Senate that we will do what is right in the eyes of God for God's people today and God's people tomorrow. And I will ask the President, God, to please bless the President of the United States, Mr. Speaker, that he will do what is right in the eyes of God for God's people today and God's people tomorrow. And 3 times I will say, God, please, God, please, God, please continue to bless America. And Mr. Speaker, with that, I will yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back.
You want to make a motion to adjourn?
Clause A of Rule 1, the House will stand in recess, subject to the call of the Chair.
The House today approved several bills dealing with veterans issues and one bill to allow fishing downstream from certain Corps of Engineers dams in Kentucky and Tennessee. Likely tomorrow, a bill dealing with the proposed Keystone XL oil pipeline. Also this week, a bill that would prevent student loan interest rates from rising. We'll have more live House coverage when they return here on C-SPAN. And a reminder that the 2013 Congressional Directory is now available. It's your guide to the current Congress with updated listings for each member of the House and Senate, contact information, district maps, and committee assignments. Also information about cabinet members, Supreme Court justices, and the nation's governors. It's $12.95 plus shipping and handling. Order yours online at cspan.org. Across the C-SPAN networks, we covered a number of congressional hearings today, including